Unsanitary conditions and clueless management made these hotels Gordon Ramsay's worst nightmares. You see, Chef Ramsay wasn't just throwing around empty threats when he talked about leaving, he was dead serious about walking out.
To get a good reading.
You could tell just by the look on his face that he wasn't messing around. This was one of those situations where you pack your bags and get out before things get worse. Now, let's dive into the infamous Beachfront Inn and Inlet, this cute little seaside hotel located in Fort Pierce, Florida. At first glance, it looks like a charming, peaceful getaway. But looks can be deceiving. It was established in 2012 by Brian Paul, who comes from a background that's a little different than you'd expect. He's not some hotel industry veteran. He made his mark in the fish market business. It's actually kind of admirable, right? The guy took the profits from his family's seafood operation and decided to roll the dice in the hospitality industry.
He's just like, kind of wanders around.
But as we'll see, jumping from selling fresh catch to managing a hotel is a bigger leap than he probably anticipated. Once Chef Ramsay started peeling back the layers of the Beachfront Inn's operations, things took a quick turn for the worse. The staff couldn't hide their discomfort any longer, and the more Chef Ramsay dug in, the more their frustrations bubbled to the surface. It was like a ticking time bomb ready to go off. You could sense the tension in every interaction.
He's just like, kind of wanders around.
And honestly, who could blame them? Brian's management style, or lack thereof, was a total disaster. The guy took laid back to an entirely new level. Some might call it easygoing, but here, it felt more like neglect. You could almost sense the resentment from his team. I wouldn't be surprised if some of them were deliberately holding back, almost like they were testing how far things could fall apart before Brian would finally take action. One of the most glaring issues, and probably the biggest reason the Beachfront Inn's reputation was circling the drain, was that the place had turned into a full-blown party destination.
Guests and employees hooting and hollering till the wee hours of the morning.
Picture this, guests were up all night, blasting music and making noise well into the early hours of the morning. It's one thing to have a lively atmosphere, but when it gets to the point where other guests, who probably paid good money for a quiet, relaxing beach getaway, are filing complaints left and right, it's a recipe for disaster. I mean, who wouldn't be upset? You come to a beachfront inn expecting serenity, the sound of waves crashing, maybe some soft breezes, but instead, you're getting club-level chaos just outside your door. It's surprising Brian didn't notice this becoming a huge issue. Maybe he was just too hands-off, thinking things would sort themselves out. But that's clearly not how the hospitality industry works. If you don't step in and set some boundaries, the whole place can spiral out of control fast. It seems like that's exactly what happened here. Chef Ramsay had to step in and try to bring some order to this wild situation. When Chef Ramsay first showed up, he was completely taken in by the hotel's stunning beachfront location. You could see why someone would want to build a hotel there. It had postcard perfect potential. But the initial charm stopped the moment he actually took a closer look. From the outside, the place looked like it had been abandoned for years, not like a welcoming seaside inn. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was out of business, with no signs of life whatsoever. First impressions are everything, and this one was definitely not working in the Beachfront Inn's favor. As soon as he walked in, he was greeted by Lisa at the front desk, but things only got weirder from there. What Chef Ramsay spotted next was pretty mind-blowing, a piece of varnished driftwood just sitting there marked up for sale at $22. Seriously? A chunk of wood from the beach being sold as decor?
What are you doing today?
Whose is this?
The boss man caught it.
And where's the other half gone?
Maybe they ate it,
Belt,
I don't know.
pair of shoes.
Couldn't tell you, it is a
What do
little
you use it
weird.
for?
I don't use it for anything, actually.
Wow, and what's that up there?
That was here when I got here, believe it or not.
That's for sale.
Apparently so, yes.
So he went onto the beach, picked up some driftwood, and then dipped it in some varnish.
It was baffling. But honestly, that was just the tip of the iceberg. As he kept looking around, it became clear that this place had turned into a mini gift shop full of bizarre, random items no one would expect to see in a hotel lobby. It was almost like a yard sale had collided with the front desk.
No.
Never. Seriously. And how much for the t-shirts?
Between $12 for employees and $18 for
The
guests.
craziness didn't stop there. As Chef Ramsay continued his exploration, he stumbled upon something truly horrifying. A barbecue grill that was still covered in charred chicken wings from the day before.
In fact, I think there's a wing left in there. When was that grilled?
Chances are
Talk
it could have
about a
been
health
yesterday.
hazard. It's one thing to love a good barbecue, but this was just gross. You'd expect cleanliness to be a priority, especially in a hotel where people are paying for comfort and hygiene. I don't know about you, but after seeing that, I'd definitely pass on ordering the buffalo wings. The surprises just kept coming, and not in a good way. Lisa then led Chef Ramsay to his room, where things somehow got even worse. As soon as he opened the door, he was hit by this overpowering musty, damp smell, like the room had been locked up for years with no ventilation. It was the kind of odor that makes you want to turn right around and find another place to stay.
It stinks in here. There's a very sort of damp, musty smell. Bloody hell.
Sure, Brian bankrolled the hotel with money from the family's fish market business, but that didn't mean the rooms had to smell like the fish was still there. And if that wasn't bad enough, the bed in the room looked like something from a bygone era, more of a relic from 15 years ago than a comfortable place to get a good night's sleep.
It stinks in here. There's a very sort of damp, musty smell. Bloody hell.
I can't imagine any guest walking into that room and being excited to settle in. It's almost like they were trying to create a time capsule of bad hotel decisions. At this point, you have to wonder how Brian let things get this far off track. But at the next hotel, things took a turn for the truly disgusting when Chef Ramsay walked into the bathroom and encountered a grim scene.
I think that's a cockroach. To welcome me on the toilet,
No way.
having a number 2.
Damn, dead insects scattered around, and to top it off, a live cockroach crawling around like it owned the place. Gross, right? It's one thing to find a stray bug here and there, but this was a full-blown infestation. And as Chef Ramsay quickly realized, this was just the beginning. These were only the insects, who knows what other horrors lay ahead? Despite the nightmare fuel, Season 1 of Hotel Hell remains one of my all-time favorites. Why? Because it introduced us to some of the most bizarre hotel owners and even more questionable business practices. Case in point, the River Rock Inn in Milford, Pennsylvania. The owner, Ken Pisciotta, was drowning in so much debt that he had racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars in losses. And how did he cope? By selling his own house and moving into one of the rooms at the inn. Honestly, you can't make this stuff up. It's ironic though, while Ken was saving on rent, his guests were stuck paying for the privilege of staying in a crumbling disaster zone. When Chef Ramsay arrived at the River Rock Inn, he was immediately struck by how unwelcoming it all felt. There was no proper reception area, and Chef Ramsay had trouble even figuring out where to check in. The first person he encountered was the assistant innkeeper, Karen, who greeted him. Chef Ramsay wasted no time pointing out the disorganized and dirty state of her own desk.
Oh dear, that is pretty bad.
Yeah, that's not very pleasant.
That's not at all pleasant.
This was the person managing guest relations, and her workspace was a mess. Not exactly the best first impression, especially when guests are supposed to feel like they're walking into a place of comfort. Karen, apparently unaware of just how bad things were, led Chef Ramsay to his room while boasting about the hotel's rich history. She claimed the building dated back to the 1880s, but Chef Ramsay couldn't help but sarcastically note that it looked like it had been stuck in the 1880s ever since. The decor was so old and rundown that it felt like stepping into a time warp, but not in a charming, historic way, in a please renovate this place immediately way. Then came the closet reveal. Karen opened the door to a closet so jam-packed with hangers and spare carpets, it was more of a storage unit than a usable space for guests. But what Chef Ramsay found next was truly revolting.
I know, I don't mind getting stuck in. Well. Oh dear.
The place was in such disarray that it made you wonder if the staff had just given up on trying to make it presentable. And it didn't stop there. As Chef Ramsay explored more of the room, he noticed a random chair awkwardly positioned in a corner. Why was it there, you ask? Because it had the best Wi-Fi signal. Can you imagine paying for a hotel room and having to sit in a strange corner just to check your email? It's like they weren't even trying to make the experience comfortable for guests. Not desperate for a distraction from the horror show unfolding before him, Chef Ramsay tried to relax by watching some TV. But in typical Hotel Hell fashion, this didn't go well either. The television was ancient, and the picture quality was so poor that you could barely make out what was on the screen. At this point, it was clear that the rooms weren't just unappealing, they were completely unfit for public use. After a long, exhausting day of dealing with the mess that was the River Rock Inn, Chef Ramsay was understandably reluctant to sleep in the bed. And who could blame him? The sheets looked anything but clean.
I knew those shitty hangers would come in useful for something. Fuck, come on.
Chef Ramsay, no doubt remembering some of the worst hotel experiences he'd endured in the past, had come prepared this time. He pulled out his trusty sleeping bag, a lesson learned after that infamous night spent sleeping in a bathtub in another rundown hotel.
Off on the bed. Oh, Jesus Christ. That has got to be
It's a
seen.
sad state of affairs when a world-renowned chef has to bring his own sleeping bag just to avoid catching something from a hotel bed. But honestly, could you blame him? The River Rock Inn was a disaster from top to bottom, and Chef Ramsay's exasperation with the situation was completely justified. The next morning, things didn't get any better for Chef Ramsay. In fact, they got worse. As he attempted to take a shower, he was hit with yet another frustrating issue.
Look at this thing. Oh, fuck me. It's like being in Danny DeVito's house.
The water pressure was awful, the shower head was so low it seemed designed for children, and the whole thing was just a mess. Imagine starting your day with a shower that's more of a dribble. It's no wonder Chef Ramsay was at his wit's end. Fed up with the countless problems, Chef Ramsay gathered the staff and the current guests into his room to confront the situation head on. And let's just say the complaints came flooding in. Guests weren't shy about voicing their frustrations. From broken bath drains and impossibly low shower heads to creepy crawlers in the rooms and mattresses that felt like sleeping on a bed of rocks, there was no shortage of grievances. It was a disaster all around. No one was comfortable and no one had any intention of staying at this inn again. But the kicker? When Chef Ramsay peeled back the covers to reveal the state of the mattresses, everyone's disgust hit a new level. The mattresses were stained, gross, repulsive stains that made you wonder how anyone ever thought it was okay to let people sleep on them. Chef Ramsay didn't even need to convince the guests to leave at this point. The look on their faces said it all. They wouldn't be coming back if you paid them. It was clear the hotel had already lost its guests long before Chef Ramsay arrived. But as bad as that inn was, they weren't the only ones drowning in filth and poor management. Some hotel owners had essentially turned their establishments into dumping grounds for every bit of junk they couldn't bring themselves to throw away. Imagine walking into a hotel that looks less like a place to relax and more like the aftermath of a yard sale that went horribly wrong.
Enjoy.
I'm appalled.
No, thank you, James.
This was the Roosevelt Inn in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, otherwise known as Dust Central. The layers of dust were so thick, they were essentially historical artifacts in their own right. You had to wonder how long it had been since anyone had properly cleaned the place. We're talking dead skin, hair, and dirt from who knows how many guests, enough to make you shudder just thinking about it. The inn was a family-run affair, with John Hoof at the helm, his wife Tina, and her daughter Lorian helping out. But while the idea of a family-run business might conjure up warm, cozy feelings, the reality here was quite the opposite. John, who juggled many roles, even served as the chef at the inn's restaurant, which honestly wasn't exactly reassuring given the overall state of the place. If the rooms were that dirty, what was going on in the kitchen? It's the kind of situation where you'd be tempted to skip breakfast altogether just to avoid what might be lurking in the food. When Chef Ramsay arrived at the inn, it's safe to say that the exterior didn't exactly blow him away. In fact, he compared the place to a funeral parlor.
Look at that.
They say all publicity is good publicity, but the billboard that old-fashioned, I'm not so
And
sure.
honestly, that might have been him going easy on it. From the outside, it looked dreary and lifeless, hardly the welcoming atmosphere you'd expect from a hotel trying to attract guests. But of course, things only got worse once Chef Ramsay stepped inside. Immediately, he was greeted by a strong, unpleasant odor that he quickly traced back to the resident dogs.
It smells like shit as well. What is that? Did the dog do a...
Oh boy, I sure hope not.
Now, dogs are great, but when the smell hits you like a wall as soon as you walk in, not exactly a great first impression. And yet, somehow, John, the inn's owner, didn't see any problem with it. In fact, he enthusiastically shared a piece of trivia that probably should have stayed a secret. The inn used to be his old elementary school. Chef Ramsay looked less than impressed, and for good reason. The walls were covered with old school pictures, and while John might have thought it added a nostalgic charm to the place, it was the wrong kind of nostalgia.
Let's see school photos
Yes.
down the hallway here, and these are of kids that went to school here.
Instead of
at the
cozy and quaint, the decor made the whole inn feel like it was stuck in time, and not in a cute vintage way, but more in a this place hasn't been updated in decades kind of way. But wait, it gets better. John proudly led Chef Ramsay to the inn's ballroom, which he bragged had been renovated just 4 years ago at the eye-watering cost of $54,000.
Friends. The guests get to hang out down here with the dogs and watch TV.
You are kidding me.
Chef Ramsay was stunned, not just by the price tag, but by how dated the room still looked despite that massive investment. Imagine spending that much money and still ending up with a space that feels old and worn out. What a waste. No wonder the inn's occupancy rate had been stuck at a dismal 20% for an entire year. Who in their right mind would pay to stay here? Chef Ramsay got his answer soon enough when he was shown to his room. As soon as he opened the door, he was smacked in the face with an explosion of pink decor. The room looked like a bubblegum factory had exploded in there, and to make matters worse, it came with a staggering price tag of $319 per night. $319, okay. For that kind of money, you'd expect luxury. Instead, Chef Ramsay found thick layers of dust coating the room, making it feel even more neglected. And then came the cherry on top, a dried flower display hanging directly above the bed.
There are times that I'll come in and she's out busy doing something and he's sitting on the
Who
couch.
thought
reading a
that
book.
was a good idea? Chef Ramsay gave the flowers a shake, and the amount of dust that came off them was enough to make him gag. It looked like those flowers hadn't been cleaned in years. Can you imagine trying to sleep under that, with dust raining down on you every time you move? At this point, it was clear the room, and the entire inn for that matter, wasn't worth half of what they were charging. Chef Ramsay wasn't just shocked, he was horrified. And honestly, who could blame him? Let's move into the chaos at this so-called luxury hotel from Season 2, Episode 2. It was falling apart, and no one seemed to care. The owner? Oh, he wasn't short on cash, he was practically drowning in millions. But here's the kicker, he had no idea what to do with it. While the hotel was spiraling into disaster, he got himself arrested for a DUI. Everyone knew about his terrible habits.
Ginger have been enjoying their wealth. The hotel has been terribly neglected.
Honestly, if you can't manage your own life, how do you expect to run a $5 million hotel? Despite his flashy lifestyle, the 50 dedicated staff members were struggling to keep their jobs on this sinking ship. And surprise, surprise, it started to show. The Monticello Hotel in Longview, Washington was teetering on the edge of collapse when Chef Ramsay stepped in to save the day. But the owner, Philip Lovingfoss, was completely out of his depth, and his girlfriend Ginger, the general manager, was desperately trying to keep things together. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion, isn't it? Honestly, the Monticello Hotel had so much untapped potential. Built in 1923, it was never short of guests thanks to its historic charm. It was one of the town's oldest buildings, a genuine relic that attracted visitors eager to soak in its vintage allure. But the moment Philip Lovingfoss took over, things started going downhill. It was painfully obvious that he was more interested in funding his extravagant lifestyle than maintaining the hotel.
Inside the beautiful historic Monticello Hotel, there are only 4 suites, and then there are countless
The
rooms
neglect was
stuffed
palpable, and it was heartbreaking to see such a gem being squandered. And if you think that's bad, wait until you hear about the hidden horrors behind those charming walls. Vanessa, the front desk clerk, gave us a glimpse into the grim reality lurking inside.
Rooms in the so-called North Wing, which is a characterless 1960s shoebox
It's a colossal
hotel.
waste of space, really. This place could have been a crown jewel, but instead, it's a testament to mismanagement and missed opportunities. But here's where things get even more absurd. While the main hotel had devolved into a hoarder's haven, guests who dared to stay were shuffled off to a sketchy side wing next door. Their reaction? Well, let's just say it wasn't positive.
Like that, my God. Wow, look at those beautiful cars.
Seriously, who would want to stay there? It's the exact opposite of what guests expect from a historic hotel. When Chef Ramsay arrived, he was initially impressed by the hotel's grand architecture. But then, he glanced at the parking lot and, surprise, it looked like a car show.
But this is not the hotel.
But here's the kicker. Those cars belong to Philip. Yes, the same Philip who claimed bankruptcy and couldn't pay his staff. Talk about priorities. Anyway, when Chef Ramsay was shown to his room, it was amusing how they treated him like any other guest. If it were me, I would have rolled out the red carpet for Chef Ramsay, giving him the best room available. Maybe Vanessa did it on purpose, who knows? But one thing's for sure, Chef Ramsay was far from impressed. It's baffling how they missed such a crucial opportunity to make a good impression. When Chef Ramsay was led to his room in the motel adjacent to the main building, his disappointment was evident to anyone watching.
Yes.
It is no big secret that Philip drinks.
He had arrived with high expectations, hoping to find a room that matched the grandeur of the hotel's historic facade. But his expression said it all. This was not what he had anticipated. Determined to find better accommodations, Chef Ramsay insisted on moving back to the main building, expecting a significant improvement. Ironically, in hindsight, he might have been better off staying in the motel. The room he ended up with was nothing short of a disaster. The conditions were shockingly substandard, far below what anyone would consider acceptable for a hotel with such a reputation. To add insult to injury, the decor was a mishmash of tacky items, all sourced directly from Ginger and Philip's personal collection. Even the mattress was from their home.
Before I arrived in Longview, things reached crisis point.
I was pulled over.
Can you imagine? It's as if they had emptied their house into the hotel rooms without any regard for style, comfort, or the guest experience. This bizarre and unprofessional approach left Chef Ramsay, and likely any other guest, completely unimpressed and bewildered. But that wasn't the end of Chef Ramsay's shocking discoveries. Vanessa took him on a tour of the other rooms, and what he saw left him in utter disbelief.
Always here? Does Philip always expedite the hot plate?
No.
We need somebody to expedite.
The state of these rooms was appalling, to say the least. It was glaringly obvious that cleanliness and maintenance were not even on the radar for the hotel management. Chef Ramsay's astonishment only grew when he met with Philip and Ginger. Seeing Philip adorned in diamonds, Chef Ramsay couldn't help but wonder why this wealth wasn't being channeled into fixing up the hotel. The stark contrast between Philip's flashy lifestyle and the hotel's dilapidated condition was striking. It was a blatant display of mismanagement and misplaced priorities, highlighting a disconnect between appearance and reality. In a dramatic move, Chef Ramsay gathered the staff in his room and used a black light to uncover the grim truth.
Come with me.
The black light revealed stains and filth that were invisible to the naked eye, a shocking and disgusting revelation that left everyone aghast. Naturally, the staff was horrified upon seeing the extent of the filth. It was a wake-up call about the true state of the hotel's cleanliness, or lack thereof. Knowing how dirty the bed was, Chef Ramsay made the bold decision not to sleep in it that night. Where he ended up sleeping will shock you.
Those two holes there, that's cigarette holes. Burns.
Yes, he chose the bathtub over the bed for safety. That's right, he found the bathtub a safer and cleaner option than the bed, which speaks volumes about the hotel's appalling level of cleanliness. This choice underscored the dire need for a complete overhaul of the hotel's maintenance practices. Chef Ramsay was filled with dread at the prospect of spending the night at the hotel, a sentiment shared by many other guests who had unfortunately booked rooms there. The conditions were so deplorable that it made for an incredibly uncomfortable stay for everyone involved. Seeking honest feedback, Chef Ramsay asked the guests about their experiences, and the response was unanimous. None of them were satisfied. They voiced their complaints about the pervasive filth, and one guest vividly described a particularly gruesome scene in his room.
$1 to sleep in filth. Oh my God. Philip's semen right there. It is everywhere.
This guest painted a graphic picture of the squalor they encountered, adding to the overall sense of disappointment and frustration. One customer in particular summed up the collective disappointment felt by most guests, including Chef Ramsay.
I'm done.
It was clear they had no intentions of returning. The consensus was that the hotel failed to meet even the most basic standards of hygiene and service, leading to a unanimous decision to avoid any future stays. Yet, this feedback highlighted the urgent need for a complete overhaul of the hotel's operations to restore any semblance of credibility and guest satisfaction. But at this next hotel, things were so dangerous that the only way to ensure everyone's safety was to literally set off the fire alarm.
I want to apologize to all of you.
It's one thing for a hotel to be poorly run, but when it gets to the point where you have to take such extreme measures, you know it's a disaster of epic proportions. This shocking moment took place during the 6th episode of Season 3, when Chef Ramsay visited yet another historic hotel teetering on the edge of ruin. This time, it was the Brick Hotel, an iconic building in Newtown, Pennsylvania. Now, when you hear that a hotel was built in 1763, you expect a place steeped in history, elegance, and charm. A place that reflects the pride of a building older than the United States itself. But what Chef Ramsay found was a far cry from that romantic image. Instead of a charming historic inn, he walked into a dust-filled disaster zone. The Brick Hotel, once a proud landmark, had become a symbol of neglect and poor management under the ownership of Verinder Kaur and her son, CJ. Verindar's leadership style was beyond controlling. She was more like a dictator than a hotelier, and her penny-pinching ways were strangling the business. Cutting corners may save you a few bucks in the short term, but in the hospitality industry, it's a fast track to losing your customers. Not surprisingly, the hotel had a reputation for being an uncomfortable place to work, leading to a high turnover rate. And if your staff is constantly leaving, it's only a matter of time before your guests start doing the same. When Chef Ramsay entered the hotel, he didn't try to hide his frustration. His anger was almost palpable as he took in the wreckage. And it was impossible to miss the smashed windows on the doors and even bullet holes in the walls. Bullet holes. At this point, it felt more like a war zone than a cozy historic inn. You couldn't help but wonder how any paying guest would tolerate staying in a place like this. And Chef Ramsay's reaction was perfectly justified. This wasn't just neglect, it was borderline dangerous.
That is mold.
Yes, I said that.
That's mold.
Then came one of the most satisfying moments. Chef Ramsay, clearly fed up with the half-peeled wallpaper, couldn't take it anymore. Watching him rip it down was cathartic because, let's be honest, it was an eyesore. You could almost feel the tension being released as he tore it off. Sometimes, it's the small victories that make the biggest statements. As if things couldn't possibly get worse, Chef Ramsay continued his tour and came across a vintage clock covered in what must have been decades of dust. It wasn't just dirty, it was like a relic frozen in time. And the reason for the appalling state of the place? The housekeeper admitted there was no cleaning schedule. At all. Can you imagine? In a hotel with such rich history, you'd expect a strict maintenance routine to preserve the building's charm, but here, they let it rot. Chef Ramsay didn't just walk into a poorly managed hotel. He walked into a situation that had been deteriorating for years, without any intervention. Verandar's attempt to run the place like a cut-rate operation was a total failure, and it's no surprise the hotel's reputation had taken such a nosedive. A place with that kind of historical significance deserved better, and the customers, who were likely drawn in by its history, deserved far more than a dust-covered, crumbling shell of a hotel. But hold on, it gets worse. Just when you thought things couldn't be more unbelievable, the housekeeper led Chef Ramsay into one of the rooms, and what they found was beyond shocking.
Curtains were gold. No, for real. They were supposed to be white.
You could almost hear the horror movie music playing in the background. It was that bad. The room was such a nightmare that it was hard to fathom how any guest could walk in, let alone sleep there. It wasn't just messy, it was downright appalling, a place no one in their right mind would voluntarily stay in. Here's where it gets a bit ridiculous. When Chef Ramsay pointed out the filthy curtains, the housekeeper, with a straight face, said she thought that was their actual color.
680. What in the... Seriously?
Can you imagine? She genuinely believed the curtains were supposed to look like that. Which means they had probably been that dirty for so long that no one even remembered what they originally looked like. It's almost comical, except for the fact that paying guests were the ones suffering through this disaster. Then, Chef Ramsay finally made his way to his own room, room 201, and surprise, surprise, it wasn't any better. As soon as he walked in, he was greeted by a thick layer of dust. Not just a little dust, but the kind that makes you wonder if anyone had touched that room in years.
680. What in the... Seriously?
The ancient TV looked like it belonged in a museum, and there was a disgusting stain on the ceiling that just added to the overall horror house vibe. At this point, it was clear that every corner of this place had been neglected for far too long. But here's where it gets even more stomach-churning. Chef Ramsay, always prepared, whipped out his bacteria testing kit and decided to check just how dirty things really were. He tested a stained chair, and the reading came back as 446, completely disgusting.
I'm done.
But believe it or not, that wasn't even the worst of it. He then tested the shower curtain, and the reading was even higher. At this point, I'm amazed he didn't just walk out on the spot. It was making me think about the infamous Monticello Hotel episode. Remember when Chef Ramsay had to sleep in the bathtub? Imagine if he had pulled out his bacteria test kit there. And if you're wondering what CJ, the co-owner, was doing about all this, well, here's a fun fact. He'd never even stayed at the hotel since buying it.
All of you, but I want to stop right now while I try endlessly to get through the owner.
That's right, the man who was supposed to be managing this catastrophe had never once spent a night there. So they were running a hotel that they wouldn't even subject themselves to. That's some next level customer service, right? It really makes you wonder how someone can run a business so blindly. By this point, Chef Ramsay had reached his limit. He stormed into a room where actual guests were staying and did something that would make anyone's skin crawl. He peeled back the carpet. And guess what he found? Mold and filth that had been festering for who knows how long. The bathroom wasn't any better. The shower was covered in grime, making the entire place a genuine health hazard. You could almost hear the collective yikes from viewers as they watched the scene unfold. So, what did Chef Ramsay do after uncovering this disaster? Well, in a moment of true heroism, he had no choice but to evacuate the guests immediately. He couldn't, in good conscience, let people stay in a place that was practically a biohazard. Honestly, that might have been the kindest thing he could have done for them at that point. And as for the next step, Chef Ramsay had to take drastic action. The hotel needed more than just a deep clean, it required a complete overhaul to restore some basic hygiene and dignity to the place. You'd think a historic hotel like this would have been treated with respect. But Chef Ramsay had to step in and save it from being lost to neglect and bad management. One hotel was in such bad shape that Ramsay questioned if it could ever be saved. Keating Hotel, which had 35 rooms, cost the owner, Eddie Kane, millions of dollars. Though he was expecting to make big business with his investment, it was quite the opposite, which is why he called the legendary chef and rescuer Gordon Ramsay. At first, Ramsay seemed to like the outside of the hotel, but his opinion quickly changed when he stepped inside, remarking that it looked like a nightclub with a completely red reception area. Greeted by the hotel's concierge, Christos, he takes him to his garage-like room that will cost him $759 a night. The room's decor is very odd, with it being a mix of modern and nightlife and including a random $20,000 jacuzzi in the middle of the living room. All the other decor looks cheap and the room shows signs of neglect with a broken socket and wrinkled sheets. Already unimpressed, things get worse when Chef Ramsay orders room service, which is served in a takeaway plastic container and tastes dreadful. Meeting with the owner, he points out that the reason his hotel is failing is because he doesn't nearly come close to providing his customers with a good experience. This clearly angers the man as he starts to vent about how the hotel is quote-unquote luxurious even though he hasn't even tried staying in the hotel himself. Following this, Ramsay tries to order some food at the hotel's restaurant, which predictably isn't any better. His meal is bland and dry, and he's even more astounded by how unappetizing their dessert of bacon and chocolate pizza was. Following some discussion with the staff, it became clear that Kane only cared about himself and his own happiness, completely disregarding the suggestions of his employees to make the customer experience better. As a wake-up call, Ramsay forces the selfish owner to hear some customers' complaints, which include the hotel having bad smells, cheap decor, inadequate furnishings, subpar food, and double charging. After changing the owner's attitude, giving the hotel an aesthetic overhaul, and revamping the menu, things were finally getting better. Since Ramsay left, things have been relatively good, with the Keating getting a 3.5 stars on Yelp across 339 reviews. Many seem to compliment the interior and location, but others complain about the noise, service quality, and hidden fees. Interestingly enough, one of the rooms has been named after Gordon Ramsay to commemorate his help. Murphy's Hotel. Being a very old building constructed over 150 years ago, Murphy's Hotel is a registered landmark. Having a beautiful vineyard surrounding it, it's been visited by some of the most notable people out there, including former presidents. Several years ago, however, this hotel was purchased by friends Brian Goss, Kevin Clarico, and Joel Ladignola, who didn't do it much good. The hotel's bar and dining area is often used as a party location, which keeps a lot of guests awake most nights. With their investment seemingly going to waste from the overwhelming lack of clientele, they call out to Gordon Ramsay for some help. Upon his arrival, he's extremely impressed with the historic status that this hotel holds, but the same couldn't be said when he finally enters. Ramsay expresses that the interior's decor is not only dated, but doesn't even really feel historic like it should. Greeted by a woman named Kenitha Smith, who has been working at the hotel for a year, she admits that the biggest problem here is the owner's lack of management skills. Not only are they neglecting their duties, but she feels that they are using the hotel as a personal playground. Later on, Ramsay visits the very pink dining room and meets with the owner Brian, who narcissistically made himself Employee of the Month. Ordering some food, it comes back not only tasting rancid, but is very cold, and after Brian tries it, he has to agree. Disgusted with his meal, he goes into the kitchen to do some inspecting and finds tons of moldy, rotting food. To kick some sense into the negligent owners, he not only tears into them with his reprimands, but sets some ground rules, with the biggest being to grow up and to do their job if they want to save their hotel. Following the frustrating events of this episode, Ramsay was able to bring the staff together and finally make some changes. He tweaked the menu so it had a much better selection, repainted the pink dining room walls, and gave the hotel rooms a more cohesive decor change. Once Ramsay left, one regular expressed that he thought that the famous chef's changes were wrong and a lot of what was removed were favorites. However, many other reviewers would disagree, saying that they were thrilled with the new menu on offer. With 3.5 stars on Yelp across 154 reviews, Murphy's is still up and running thanks to Chef Ramsay. Cambridge Hotel. Purchasing the 150-year-old Cambridge Hotel with the help of his family, John Imhoff and his wife Tina were hoping to get a piece of the business's success. Although, despite the existing clientele, the Imhoffs were incapable of upholding the quality of this historic hotel, so they sought the help of Gordon Ramsay. Once arriving, Ramsay is disturbed by the bizarre "Rest in Peace" sign, which is supposedly related to the ghost of Alice, who allegedly haunts the place. Talk about unwelcoming. Meeting the owners, they admit that they lost $350,000 in their first year and $250,000 in their second. Wanting to sample at least their food, Ramsay sits down in the dining room and everything he receives is boring and cold. Through a conversation with Tina, Ramsay comes to understand that John doesn't listen to anything his staff suggests and acts like a dictator who must control everything. The following morning, the Hotel Hell host gathers the owners and some paying guests who have some really horrible things to say. They complain about a range of things from hairs being found all over their rooms, beds being broken, door locks not functioning, and overall expressing that they'd never return. Ramsay also dishes out a complaint of his own, revealing that the main entrance is left unlocked and every room key and card details are there for anyone to take. After some valuable exchanges with the patrons and his employees, John was finally starting to see that he should listen and trust his staff. Over the course of a night, Chef Ramsay and his team work on the hotel to make it feel more welcoming. He attempts to modernize the hotel with an improved dining room with wooden flooring and white drapes, and removes the ugly floral wallpaper. Their hotel also received $75,000 worth of new linen and towels to replace the old ones and an improved menu. Sadly, we don't have the best news in regards to the Cambridge Hotel. Following the episode, things were very positive, with them receiving 4.5 stars across 3 reviews on Yelp. However, not even a few months after all the changes were made, the hotel was placed on foreclosure and was bought by the bank. Eventually, the hotel was sold at an auction for $375,000 and was converted into an assisted living residence. How disappointing. Brick Hotel. In this episode, Ramsay pays a visit to the Brick Hotel in Newton, Pennsylvania, which is another historic hotel. Purchased by the therapist Verinder Kaur and her son CJ, they seemingly always cut corners to make a profit, which usually makes for a bad experience. Wanting to make more money on their close to failing hotel, they seek the guidance of Gordon Ramsay. Right before entering the hotel, Ramsay meets with a large group of ex-employees who believe the staff turnover is in the hundreds. One staff member even claimed that she saw over 50 different managers during her time working for the Brick. Many would end up quitting since they either weren't paid on time or in full, and if they chased the boss down for a payment, she would lash out. Sometimes the boss would get so angry at her staff for asking for their rightful pay, she would call the cops. What a kook. Following these interactions, Ramsay notices that the windows on the entrance's door were smashed, the wallpaper was peeling off, and there were literal bullet holes in the wall. Going to check into his room, he discovers the clock is caked in years of dust, which disgusts him. Eventually, the housekeeper arrives and she reveals that there is no schedule for cleaning, which explains why everything is filthy. The room he's supposed to stay in isn't any better, being covered in dust and even having visible stains. Already fed up with what he's seeing, he goes down to the restaurant hoping they'll at least have some decent food. Ordering French onion soup, a cauliflower steak, and a crab sandwich, everything comes back tasteless and stale. Having a chat with the owner, Verinder, after this horrible experience, she blames everything on the staff and denies ever calling the police on them, which a current employee explains is a lie. To make matters even worse, Ramsay took out his bacteria testing kit and the shower curtains had a rating of 5,680. That's disgusting. As a result, Ramsay evacuates and shuts down the hotel, holding a meeting with the entire staff. After a ton of discussion, the hotel hell host managed to make some progress with the stubborn Verinder with the help of her son CJ. He was finally able to start making some changes. Ramsay gave not only the lobby and rooms a complete makeover, but the menu was also revamped. Following the show's intervention, CJ became more present, which allowed for his mother to step back. Staff turnover was at an all-time low and things were slightly better. However, over the course of a few months, the hotel generally received negative reviews, many complaining about the prices being too high. Today, the hotel has new owners, was renovated and renamed to Rocco's at the Brick, which also has mixed reviews. Well, that'll be all for today's video here on the channel. I do hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, be sure to drop a massive like down below and comment your thoughts. Subscribe for more content like this and turn on those sweet bell notifications for instant access to our content. If you thought these hotels were outrageous, don't miss this next video right where Ramsay found himself dealing with the most chaotic owner and kitchen nightmares.